Kingston, Frontenac, and the Zoom notice has just come up. The recording is in progress. So to all participants, we are going to be recording the speaker portion of the event. We will not be recording once that's over and we start the photo sharing, because we don't have permissions from everyone who's sent in their photos. So with no further ado, I guess we'll get moving on this. So just the housekeeping notes, which you've seen before. A reminder to keep yourself muted until you've been prompted to present your photos. This is particularly important because we are recording today. At this point, we talk about video, and I normally leave the choice up to you. We are asking folks to keep their videos off until prompted today. It just saves on bandwidth, and because we're recording, we're hoping we won't have any problems with that. And finally, there's a chat box, and feel free to ask any questions in there. I will be trying to monitor and keep abreast of questions as we're going through. Kevin has asked that we sort of hold questions till the end, so I will try and keep track of those, but there will be an opportunity to ask Kevin questions at the end. So a few words about the Land Conservancy. The Land Conservancy for Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington is a registered charity. We are an all-volunteer group, and we're in the business of protecting properties. And currently we're protecting 13 properties, and we gain these properties either through, in a few cases, generous donations by the original landowners, or through actual purchase where we've received donations, and there's so many supporters out there. We've just have such a strong supporting community locally. We are protecting 1,117 acres, 452 hectares of land, and our goal is to provide permanent safe havens for nature. Without any further ado, I would like to present our speaker for today. Kevin McGowan is an ornithologist at Cornell University, and he's been studying crows for a long time, as he says. And I will turn it over to Kevin at this point, and he can expand on that. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Can people see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Kevin McGowan, and I need to find a screen here. Pardon me a second. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So I'd like to talk to you tonight about crows. And just a warning, I could talk for over 6 hours about crows with slides. But I'm not going to do that here. I'm sort of stripping this down, and we're going to talk about things that are especially of interest, it seems, to the people in Kingston. I'm going to talk a little bit about crow roosts and how they work and what's going on, what we know about those. But I'm going to start off by talking about basic crow biology and how I view the crow and how my group and I get to know crows. American crow is the most widespread corvus in North America. And actually, this is an outdated slide here. We've since incorporated the northwestern crow into the same species as American crow. And so their range actually makes it all the way up to southern Alaska in the Anchorage area. And what I've found through the years that have been talking about crows is that the crows elicit very strong opinions of people basically either love or hate crows. And when I'm in an auditorium, I usually ask people to hold up their hands and say, how many people are here because you love crows? And then how many people are here because you hate crows? And usually there are a few honest people in the audience who say they're there because they dislike them, they want to learn about. And there are many reasons to love or hate crows. Usually the haters, it's something about eating baby birds. And I say, well, yeah, but you know, squirrels and snakes, they eat the most baby birds, so you got to dislike them before you start hating on crows. And for loving them, it's usually something about, oh, they're so smart and personable and something like that. And I agree with a lot of that, but I'm an ornithologist and I like them for a lot of different reasons. And one of those is that I like them because they're fun-loving party animals. That they never do anything quietly or alone. They're always in groups and making noise. And I say, who can't love a bird that likes beer and pizza? I mean, I don't particularly approve of the light beer, but hey, you know, fun-loving party animals. That's what I like them. And I have been working on crows for quite a while. I started working on crows at Cornell in 1988, first banding them in 1989, and have banded for 35 years. Um, and I, somewhere around the year 2000, I was joined by Ann Clark at Binghamton University, and she's had a number of students that work there, and we've had a number of PhDs and master's students coming out of Binghamton and Cornell, and actually even Ohio State University, and lots of undergraduates and even local volunteers involved in this big project. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, our basic techniques, and how I try to know crows. And then we'll get into what we've learned a little bit. Our techniques are basically, when I got started, I want to know everything about them. I wanted to know reproductive success and how many eggs they lay and how many young are there and how they grow up and all of that. And the first thing that we have to do is find a nest. And that's often a lot harder than it sounds because crows usually hide these big bushel basket nests really well so that you can't see them. And this is like the only nest I think I've ever had in the 35 years of the study that you could just look at sort of eye level and take a picture of the female sitting on the nest where it looked like she was obvious, because it usually doesn't work that way. And as I say, through the years, I've taken a lot of basic data on reproduction, looking at counting eggs and measuring eggs and counting babies and all of that, and measuring nestling growth, as I say, a number of things involving the reproduction. And notice that this guy right here, who's about a week away from fledging, has blue eyes. The babies start out with blue eyes, and then gradually through the first summer, they turn dark brown, and you don't notice them. The blue-eyed thing is kind of cool. When they're about a week or so before they can fly, we climb up and grab the nestlings and bring them down to do some stuff to them. I just want to point out that I make claims that this is the first selfie ever posted on the internet. I took this picture of myself grabbing a nestling out of a nest back in May 2000. And I immediately put it on my web pages that I had about crows. So it may not be the first selfie posted on the internet, but I haven't heard anybody say that they've found one any earlier than that anyway. So we do bring them down to work on them, and especially to put tags on them. We do some bleeding for genetics and sexing and whatever is going on, other studies that are on the books that year. But the main thing here is that we bring these kids down and we mark them as individuals. We give them 3 names, essentially. If they get a Fish and Wildlife Service medal band that has a unique number on it, and they also get a unique combination of colored leg bands. And of course, the most obvious thing is that big plastic patagial tag that allows us to see them from a great distance away. That always has 2 characters on it. And we've gone through all the total combinations of all letters and numbers more than two times now. We're sort of on our third swath through the combinations. And these patagial tags are really important because they allow us to find crows from long distances when they're away from home and out foraging somewhere. Here's a wing-tagged crow flying with a foraging flock of crows away from home. And we can read these things, more than a half a kilometer away if the conditions are good. And this allows us to know the birds as individuals. It's not just a flock of crows. It's certain crows that we know. We know how old they are. We know who's related to whom and all of that. And it's allowed us to see how long the crows live and follow individuals for long periods of time. Essentially, I want to know them from egg till they die. And here's some examples of why we use multiple markers on the birds, because you can see things like the plastic leg bands crack and fall off. The wing tags themselves get ratty and fall off. And so we hope that there will always be something there that identifies those particular birds even. And it turned out that the metal bands we were using started to fall off at 10 years old. And we had no idea that it was going to do that. It took us 10 years to learn that they won't last long enough. We started using hardened bands that we've had not as many problems with, that the birds shed those. It's usually that's the last thing to go on them. And how long do they go? Well, here are two birds that had a lucky shot. These guys this is in 2012, and I banded both of these as nestlings in 1993. So they were just about 19 years old at that point. And you can see the guy in the back has white flecks on his face. He has no bands and no tags at this point, but we know him from the facial markers and his behavior. And AP, the guy in the front, he's also friendly and he had a cataract in his right eye, even though his bands were gone. He had just kept a tiny little piece of wing tag until he was 18, and then in the last few months it disappeared. And this is our oldest bird, and MP Jessup 97. This photo was taken in June 2015 when she was 18, and I knew her as an egg in 1997. She became a breeder when she was 4, and we followed her nesting success for 15 years. And unfortunately, merlins, the small falcons, moved into her neighborhood, and they used her old nest for a few years. But then in 2016, they harassed MP off of her nest of eggs and took over the nest. She was seen building a new nest, but then disappeared. We presume dead at the age of 19. And so who knew they were going to live that old? Actually, I knew somewhere around 7 years into the study when I did what's known as a life table analysis. And the survival of my tag crows at that point indicated that a cohort, the last individuals of a cohort, should die somewhere around 20 years old. And the oldest known crow is, I think, 29 years old. And then our birds are next. We've had like 5 birds that have come to 18, 19 years old. So we try to follow them as individuals for a fairly good time. We've done a lot of other work. We've done some radio tracking to follow the individuals around. Now we haven't really employed all that really cool, GPS tracking stuff that's available these days. I wish that stuff had been available 20 years ago. We've found a lot of stories to tell, but it would have been really neat to be able to have the kind of information that you can get from the new technology these days. But still, we know enough about the birds to say something about it. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the family life of crows, how these birds live in families. And it's really funny. I've spent a lot of my career trying to stop people from anthropomorphizing birds and other animals. Birds are not little people, and they don't do the same things that we do. They don't think the same thoughts. And I have a couple of courses that I've taught online about how to understand bird behavior, and it isn't considering them as little humans. But it turns out that the American crow, at least in this part of the world where we live, in Ontario and New York, their social system is just about as close to ours as any other creature on Earth, more so than any primate. And I'll go into some of this and see if you agree. crows live in family groups, and it takes a lot of work to raise them up from incubation and keeping them in the nest for about 5 or 6 weeks till the young get big enough to leave. And they're dependent until they're several years old. This is a dependent fledgling. It's just a baby that's begging from its parent, one of its parents, and they get to be really big. So it's kind of funny, surprising sometimes to see these birds that big and looking like they should be on their own, but they're not. In fact, we had somebody call into Cornell Lab of Ornithology once who complained about the tagging that I was doing, and that they said those wing tags make it so bad that the birds can't fly and other crows have to feed them. And so what she was seeing was clumsy bird that can't fly, has wing tags on, is being fed by other crows. And she just assumed that it was because of the tags that the bird couldn't fly. And she missed the fact that these are kids and we're getting fed. And yeah, I had another person who actually was watching the tag crows in his neighborhood. And he said, if until you put the wing tags on those crows, I didn't know that they lived in family groups. And they do. And the crows, they stay at home for a long time. In fact, it's over winter, it's fairly standard sight in Ithaca to have multiple birds, the young crows of the year, on the same territory. So the young that hatched in a particular year, staying with their parents, and they often stay with their parents for a number of years. They stay home for a long time, which is unusual for birds, but they also come and go. They forage communally with unrelated crows and in fields and dumps, and sometimes in the city and along shorelines and things like that. And you can see that there are a number of crows, tag crows in the group here. They're actually, five tags here. And these crows are not related. These are unrelated crows that are in a cornfield. But the birds do stay with their parents for many years and stay at home. In this part of the world, American crows have permanent territory that the breeders are on almost every single day of the year. But it's not just that's not the only place they go. They also go off into these foraging flocks. And so they know each other as neighbors in a neighborhood. They know each other as crows to be hanging around with. And so they have this, and also they're cooperative breeders where the mother and father stay with have the kids, and then the kids stay with the parents for a number of years. And then those kids actually help raise the next group of young, and they can be a nice, happy family for a while. Here's an illustration of the second most visible nest I ever had in the study. And you can see here that the bird in the back is the father, and he brought food in and gave it to the mother, who is feeding the young in the nest. And then there's a 1-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter that are watching very closely, attentive to see what's going on and learn what's happening. And then they actually go off and get food and bring it back to the young and feed them. And we've got a couple of pictures here of extended families. These are 3 brothers that are, I think, I forget what the year classes are here, but from 3 different years that are still hanging around on the parents' territory. And this group, crazy group up here, they had, at the time of this, when I was taking this with the fledging of the new birds, this is a new bird, that they were a family of 15 individuals. That's mother and father and kids from 6 different year classes that were still there. And the weirdest thing about this was that later in the summer, they actually adopted a kid from next door, that he ended up hanging around. And I presume most of the family are like, oh, well, I don't know. I don't know if I know this one or not. I'll just give him food. So they can get to be crazy big, although not all families are like this. But about 80% of the nests and families that I follow have more than just two the parent birds feeding at them. As I say, the crows do live in devoted families. At home, they forage together. They guard each other. That's why there's usually a sentinel around watching for danger. And I don't know if you've noticed, but crows don't turn up as roadkill very much on the highways. They're a very infrequent roadkill bird. And partly that's because there's always a crow up in a tree looking around. And he says, car, 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 when there's traffic approaching. Bad joke, I'll go on. At home, they actually have affiliative behavior. That is, they take care of each other. They alloprene, that is, they preen the back of each other's heads. And sometimes they like it and sometimes they don't. Like here you can see this adult working on this yearling bird, and it's clearly leaning away, said, no, mom, come on. It's like, I remember that when we were going to church when I was a little kid, my mom licks her handkerchief and I was like, here, come here, let me get that off you. And it's like, no, please, no. And this other one over here is the kid that's begging. This is a 2-year-old is begging to his father. And he really wanted to be alloprene, but his dad wasn't going along with it. So the kid got up on a higher perch closer to the dad to say, please, dad, scratch my head, scratch my head. But then the male just moved away. So this is just some of the stuff that the families do. This one is a little bit different. This was a male in the beginning of the breeding season who was alloprening his female. And this, I think it was a 1 or 2-year-old kid came over and it's like, oh, do me, daddy, do me, which he did. Okay, to summarize, American crows live in family groups, 2 to 15 individuals. Family members protect and care for each other. Young crows help their parents raise the next brood of the young in the years after their own hatching. So if you see a group of crows consistently in one place over and over, it's not a gang, it's not a murder, it's a family. So keep that in mind when you're watching crows. Turn here and look to roosts. I said that the crows are fun-loving party animals, and these winter roosts are like a big slumber party. It's like, yeah, everybody gets together, and you know how it is in a slumber party. They make a lot of noise and stay up late, and that's kind of the way American crows do too. This is a standard thing for crows all around the world, is that they like to gather in large congregations that we call roosts, usually in the non-breeding season, sometimes in the breeding season, but definitely, again, in Kingston area and around, this is definitely a winter phenomenon of these birds coming into large groups to roost. And why do they do it? Well, anytime you see a large number of animals coming together, there's usually, it's for one of 3 reasons. One is it's protection from predators, that they're sort of hiding behind each other. Other is some shared information about food, either where the food is or helping them to some way find food, or they're partaking in a big bonanza, and so there's just a lot of food to be had. And then usually there's some kind of social benefits going on that we're not really sure about. And these are the harder ones to tease apart. Sometimes it's for sex, sometimes it's for something else. We were doing some radio tracking on crow roosts a number of years ago, and I had one kid that year who was radio tracked, and there was a big flock of we didn't have a big roost in Ithaca. It was fewer than 10,000, so it was probably in the 5,000-6,000 range. And they get together on the Cornell golf course in the evening to do these big aggregations and yell and chase each other around and do all kinds of stuff. And then all of a sudden they all go off to the roost itself. And so I'm following a couple of birds that were in the things. Yep, there they go. Yep, there they go. And then I went to this kid, and it's like he went home. It's like he went to the party, but he didn't want to do the sleepover. And what was he getting from that? It's like it's hard to understand, but clearly something. There's some information to be had to going to just the just the party and not the sleepover. So this is an image of its typical pre-roost gathering. This one happened to be in Auburn, New York, in a cemetery in Auburn. And they do get together and make a lot of noise, and then they go off to the roost themselves. In some places, they're out on bare branches. I followed a large roost in my hometown of Springfield, Ohio, when I was starting to work on crows, and I was really surprised at where they landed. It's like the birds I had been used to in Ithaca were hiding buried in vegetation. This is an infrared photo, and you can see the eye gleaming here reflecting, but you can see the few crows here, and they were well hidden and buried in vegetation. That's what I was used to. And then sometimes there's a mix of it. It's Auburn roost again, and these two spruces here had more than 200 crows that were hiding in them. But you can see in the back here, there are a whole bunch of birds that are still out on the tips of the branches. And why they do that, I honestly don't know. Why some do that and some don't. And this is a summer roost. We were doing some following. This is in maples, and again, you can see these little dark spots in the infrared up here that are the crows, fairly well hidden. Several crows in the same tree, but not packed tightly together. And then this is what was going on in Auburn, 40 miles to the north of Ithaca. And so on pretty much the same day, our smaller roost in Ithaca, the birds were hiding, and in Auburn, they were out there like Christmas ornaments on a Christmas tree. And why the difference? I'm actually still not sure. I think some of it has to do with ambient lighting and whether the birds can move around or not. But I'm really still not sure. We did find we had radios on individuals when we looked at roost use, and the yellow here is birds that these are individual crows. And you can see that some of them roosted off territory almost completely, and some did a little bit, and a couple of them didn't. They just slept at home. And look at the pattern of several individuals through the season. There really didn't seem to be any real pattern. I mean, 3S started off roosting at home and then went big time into the communal roost somewhere else. And then 0G actually was at the communal roost right away, and then I don't know, got bored with it or something and came home. And so it's we did not find any obvious patterns of the local birds going into these large roosts. We did find that they tended to go, if your family went, you went, and that there were a few exceptions to that as well. So these things have become an urban phenomenon, and they didn't used to do that. 100 years ago, they definitely did not do that. But then in the 1980s and 90s, they started moving into urban areas. And I was first alerted to the Auburn roost in 1995. And we know from published studies that in 1913, there were thousands of crows gathering to roost near Auburn, New York, but they were about a mile or two outside of the city. And it was only in the 90s that they actually moved right into town. And the question is, well, why? Why would they do that? And there are a few attractions in the city to roost. First, not food. I mean, you can see the crows foraging, but this Auburn's roost was a roost of 75,000 birds. And so 75,000 birds were not feeding all day in Auburn. They were feeding in the countryside around it. So food's not the answer. But one of them is that they're trees, and that's something that in a lot of agricultural landscapes, they're not everywhere. You know, you go to Oklahoma or Iowa, and or Saskatchewan, and trees can be really hard to come by. So this is one thing that they do have. And cities are also warmer than the local countryside, often up to 10 degrees warmer with what we call a heat envelope that envelops it. And so in places like here in Kingston, when it gets cold in the winter, yeah, I mean, a little heat is very welcome. And then the other thing that that I think is true is that there are fewer predators that can attack them, and they have their lights in the city, and the crows can actually see what's going on rather than being in total blackness. And I think this is a big reason. We often find these uh, urban roosts are attracted to things like the first one I saw in Auburn was attracted to a prison that was well lit up. They often come around hospitals and universities, and in Pennsylvania, it was the car dealerships that had their big lights on all night. And I think they use them as night lights because the single biggest predator after people on crows is the great horned owl. And the great horned owl takes baby crows, it takes adult crows. It is the boogeyman. It is the thing that comes in the middle of the night and takes you away and eats you, right? So for crows, this is a big deal. And the thing is that crows are like people, they don't have any special adaptations to see in the dark, but owls do. And owls can see very well, and they know what's going on. But if you're in a tree in the absolute dark and suddenly something happens somewhere, where do you go? How do you fly out safely and see what's going on? And in these urban areas that have lights, we actually know from some studies that followed individual birds is that crows actually move around sometimes during the night, moved into different positions, different areas in uh, the roost with uh, and they couldn't do that outside of town if there were no lights. They just wouldn't be able to navigate the trees and things like that. So with that, I'm interested to hear I see that the Kingston roost is a new phenomenon, and that there are a lot of people that actually enjoy the crow roosts, and we'll see some numbers, I think, that Mary Alice has for us that will show what's going on. But what I've found is that once you get to about 10,000 birds, it starts to be, people get annoyed, especially if they're in town where it can be kind of noisy and kind of messy. And just a couple of important points to remember to know about roosts is that they're temporary. They only occur in these very large numbers from October through March. And then in March, they'll disappear. And they actually are contain crows from the local area and from far away. Here in Ithaca, we know we get birds from Canada that come down and spend the winter in our area. We've banded birds here that have turned up in Montreal and Ottawa and places like that. And the other thing is that the crow roosts really don't give you any information about population trends. That just because you suddenly are seeing 4,000 birds every evening, it doesn't mean that the population is doing extremely well. And in fact, crow populations are not doing very well overall. And they can be, as showed by this car that I photographed, they can be a nuisance and an inconvenience, but there's no real human health risk. And they mean you no harm. They're not doing it to annoy you. So I hope that Kingston doesn't get to the point where people really don't like their crows, but if you do, try to be calm and just know they're doing what they've been doing for millennia. Okay, to kind of wrap up here, let me just say, to know the crow isn't just a lighthearted title. We actually are trying to learn how to deal with the crows. I didn't talk about how crows can recognize us as individuals and respond to us differently, but they can, and that's a real big deal. It's actually a very fun thing when you're studying crows, or I'm not even studying crows, just being friends of crows, that they learn who you are. Not, you go to the park and the ducks come waddling up to you because they're your person, so they'll feed you. But no, the crows are like, they'll pick you out of a crowd and come over and say, hey, you got any peanuts for me? And how they do that, we have no idea, but they're good about it. And we've been through, for 35 years or so, been trying to do the same with them, to pick them out of a crowd and say, hey, why aren't you on the nest right now? It's, your mate needs some food, that kind of thing. Or, hey, here's a peanut. And you can imagine what it would be like if you're trying to understand anything about human behavior if all you saw were faceless dark figures in the crowd. And so have been trying to get beyond that and to actually learn what individuals do. And that's what's been made it so much fun for me through the years, is getting to know a bunch of crows and watch them through their lives. So that's about all I have to say. Although I do want to point out that I work in Bird Academy at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and we have almost 25 online courses about birds and nature. One of them is about crows. And so if you're interested in learning more about crows and more about my group's research, you can go to Bird Academy and take our course. And in fact, those of you who would like to do that, we're giving you a coupon code for 60% off of the price. And the code, I think, can we put that in chat? That it's Crow King, like crows in Kingston, Crow King, all one word. And when you go and purchase the course, and you put in a coupon code, and it'll give you 60% off the price. And note here the price of $39.99. That, remember, that's the US dollars, not Canadian, but you still get 60% off, no matter where you're from. So, and with that, I will hand it back over to Mary Alice. You can find my stop share button.
That was fantastic, Kevin. I think we're good. And that was really great. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for that. And at this point,